today in the suburbs of Chicago, and I'm just going to walk through a few things that we find on inspections so that folks who have never been on an inspection or have been on very few can kind of understand what the process is, what different items in the house are, and how we will inspect them, and how some things how we won't inspect them. The house is on a well water supply, so what we have here is a water filter and a water softener system. Typically during an inspection, these items would not be inspected. I would say by most inspectors, although some may have some expertise in it, but this is the brine tank where the salt goes in. Sometimes you'll see salt piles or salt blocks or bags next to the water softener. That's where that goes in. And then these are different parts to the well and the filter system. Again, we probably wouldn't be inspecting these. Timer for the water softener. Very important item down here that people ask all the time, where is the water shut off? There are a lot of different valves in this setup. This would be the main water shutoff for the house. So if we turn that, that will turn things on. Again, we're in a vacant house, so we're not going to turn this on because it's been winterized. So the water shutoff is right here. And then we do get this question on houses on wells. There's typically a little tank that's attached to it. In this case, this is an expansion tank, and this has to do with how the well works. Keeping pressure in the system so that the well pump does not have to turn on and off every time you turn water on. That's an expansion tank. What we're looking at here is the electric distribution panel. But before we get to this, I want to talk about a couple things that we don't inspect. A lot of newer homes have these. So what you have here is the alarm system. This would be normally something most inspectors don't inspect. Just to have a look inside, you can see there's a little battery and then some low voltage wiring. This goes off to the different contacts and motion sensors around the house. The other thing here, this is a smart panel so that people can have everything sort of centrally located. And again, most inspections, this would not be included, but you can see where all of the Cat5 computer wiring comes down, cable wiring. If people have telephone and VoIP, that stuff is going to be going into here. So that is, again, something typically not inspected. Now here, sort of, this is the business end of the whole electric system in the house. What you've got is a main distribution panel and a sub panel here. The question often comes up, how can I determine the size of the electric service? The simplest way is to look at the size of the main disconnect in the panel. Some caveats on that for real estate agents. Typically, an inspector would not simply rely on that, so be very careful if you're talking to people about the size of the electric panel just by commenting on this. It's usually reliable, but not always. In this particular case, this is a 200 amp service. This panel is almost full. You've got room for a few more circuits here, but I think that the electrician, when they built this, sort of anticipated that they were going to run out of room, so they threw a sub panel in, and this will have the ability to add additional circuits. So they've got one air conditioner here and some other things, but if you were going to finish the basement, this is not a finished basement, you would have room for 2, 4, 6, 8 more circuits here. So the question comes up, can I plug a new electric car in? You could probably use 2 of those circuits there. If you're going to finish a basement, you'll use 3 or 4 circuits in here. So that's that. Now, a good inspection, and as a matter of fact, the state standards in Illinois require that the inspector look at the wiring. So this is probably one of the more dangerous parts of the job. We're opening a live electric panel. And I've pre-staged this by removing these screws. So it's not usually quite this simple, but I'll just show you what the inside of the panel looks like. And what we're looking for here would be the condition of the wiring, make sure that nothing is overheated. We're going to check to see that all of the circuits are installed properly. We're going to make sure that the circuit breaker rating is in concert with the wire size. And there are a lot of different things we have to look at in here. So if you have an inspection, this is definitely something that should be opened. If these are painted shut or caulked shut in a finished basement, oftentimes people will not open these, and we'll leave that up to the seller to provide access for us. Another thing I just wanted to point out that is pretty common in the home inspection business now is thermal imaging. So I've got here 2 thermal imaging cameras, or sometimes called infrared cameras. What these do is detect heat. A cautionary note, a lot of people think that these can look through walls and x-ray vision and things like that. They don't. They simply detect heat. So let me just show you a couple of things. on these. We've got an older camera that I have had for about 15 years. These were very expensive way back when. Probably paid $5,000 or more for this camera. It was a good camera in its day, but it's frankly way surpassed by a camera here at about half or about a tenth of the cost. This is about a $600 camera. So what these do is they will show warm and cold spots. And I'm not sure if you can see in the video, the lighter color gray is actually warmer spots on these. So what we would look for in an electric panel would be overheated wiring, overheated circuit breakers, things like that. But we'll also use these on different mechanical equipment like furnaces, water heaters, things like that, to see if there's any hot spots in those. And we'll also be looking for moisture in floors, walls, and ceilings with these. So they're a pretty valuable tool. Again, cautioning a little bit that these are not X-ray vision, because people seem to think in a lot of cases that we can look through walls with these. Here we're looking at a furnace. A typical inspection of a furnace is going to include removing the cover. You can see the burners, the inducer fan. And in this case, we're going to open up the fan compartment. I'll be right back. Okay, so now we've got the top of the furnace cover off. We're going to pull off the blower compartment cover or fan compartment. And here you can see the furnace with all of the different parts exposed. If we were going to thermal image this is where we would be looking with our camera on this. Oftentimes we get questions, where do we change a filter? It's not always set in stone where we're going to be doing that, but in this case, this is where the filter on this furnace sits. One thing I do want to show you over here, bring the camera over, you can see there's a switch, and this switch that looks like a light switch is actually the power for the furnace. So those have to be on. We get questions about this all the time where people say, what's that switch all about? So just to be aware, for people who have little kids, if that switch gets flipped off, the heating and air conditioning are not going to be working. Okay. Typical inspection, we'll be turning the furnace on, we'll be looking in here, the burners are up in here, we'll be verifying that all that works. We're going to check for gas. So this is a gas detector, and we would, in a case like this, we would be sniffing out all the different gas piping in here, and then the gas piping that runs away from here and up to the gas meter. That's the main things on the furnace. Okay, this furnace is equipped with a humidifier. The state standards for home inspectors do not require that we operate humidifiers. I like to make it a good practice to do that. So we'll pull the cover off, and you can see inside there's a little media pad that has to be replaced, typically yearly. There's a damper control for this. This is just typically what they look like. The control is up near the thermostat. We would turn it on and off and make sure that water runs down through this system. But that's the guts of the humidifier. Okay, so here is the water heater in this house. And the main things we're going to look at on a water heater, we like to get the age off of these. There's a data plate right here. On this particular brand, Bradford White, there's a complicated data code that we have, and we have to go look these up. But in this house, I think this is probably going to be the original because this is a relatively new home. The other thing we're going to do with these is we want to look down in the burner compartment. This particular one is sealed. There is a viewing window, so I would be able to look through that viewing window. And then this is the gas control valve that would allow us to turn the water on or off, or the water heater up or down, I'm sorry. In this case, the gas is shut off. If you look here, this is the gas valve for the water heater. This is a vacant house, so they've turned the gas off and winterized it, but we're not going to run this today. And incidentally, in a typical home inspection scenario, if something is shut off, home inspectors usually will not turn things on. So we would typically not light a pilot light and not turn gas onto a furnace or a water heater or really any sort of appliance. Okay, so in this particular house, we have a radon reduction, or sometimes called a radon mitigation system. These are required to be labeled like that, so it says radon mitigation. We often get the question on these, what is the little blue gauge here? This is called a manometer, and what this is telling you is that the system is functioning. Cautionary note here, there are some numbers. I don't think from where you're at you can see these, but the numbers on this do not tell you what the radon level is. They tell you that there is a suction, or they're actually reading inches of mercury on this. So when you see this, I'll undo this real quick. You're going to see these two little columns of air even up. That tells you that there's no suction because they've removed the the gauge hooks. But that's how those systems work. They're going to be labeled radon. Okay, so what we've got here is an ejector pump, and I want to quickly explain the difference between an ejector pump and a sump pump. In this particular case, the ejector pump picks up water from a floor drain. So there's a floor drain right over here. You're not going to be able to see. It's out of the picture. But the water from that will drain into here. If there were a bathroom in this basement, it would drain into here as well. The pump automatically will go on, and it will pump up through this pipe and out to the sewer system. Okay? These must be sealed. You're going to get sewer odors out of these, so these have to be sealed and they have to be vented. All right? That's an ejector pump. If you turn around, I'm going to walk over here, and you're going to see a sump pump. So not to be confused, this is a sump pump. And what a sump pump does, this picks up clean water from around the home. The entire basement is surrounded by what's called a drain tile that picks up snow melt, rainwater, basically clean water, and dumps it into the sump crock. The sump pump that is inside of there will pump that water out when it reaches a certain level and pump it out somewhere. The ejector pump we looked at was pumping to the sewer. This will typically not pump to the sewer. These are required to pump out to the lawn, or I think there's a retaining pond in this neighborhood. So that's where that is. So in a kitchen, just a couple comments on this. There's very little that a home inspector is required to do in a kitchen, but the local sort of rules are that inspectors do inspect appliances, at least the inspectors I know. So in this case, we would run the dishwasher. We typically wouldn't add soap into this, but we would look to see that everything is intact in here. We would typically run it through a cycle. I like to start those at the beginning of the inspection because some of these will take a couple of hours. We would obviously run water in the sinks. There's a garbage disposal here that we would turn on. We would run that. We would check the sprayer on the sink. We would typically run microwave, range top. In this case, this is gas, so we would probably be checking for gas underneath here. And then as I move over here, the oven, we would check the interior of the oven and run this. For me personally, I typically do not turn the oven on and check to see the temperature is met. I just check to see that it's heating. They're all different, so I have found that checking temperature is not normally something to do. And then the other stuff we would do in the kitchen, and this would be required, is we would check all the cabinets, wall outlets, drawers, that type of stuff to make sure that everything is working. Okay, so this is a laundry room. In this particular house, because it's vacant, there is no laundry, but this would be the washer and dryer hookup. Normally we would run those as well, and then in this case there's a sink right around the corner here. We would check that sink and check underneath to make sure that there's nothing leaking. Okay, so we're in the family room in this house, and this has a fireplace. Now, this is not a wood-burning fireplace, it's just a gas fireplace. So I'll show you some real quick things on these. A lot of times there's a cover that will either come off or a door that will open. Down in here is all of the control wiring and the gas piping for the fireplace. If the fireplace is not lit, we generally shy away from lighting them. I'm not a big fan of starting fires in people's houses. So sometimes you'll see a switch on the wall that will turn around, but in this case, it is not. So this is not a fireplace I would operate. I know on this particular one that it is not a wood-burning fireplace, and I think it's really important that inspectors identify whether something is in fact wood-burning or not. Just kind of going around the room, we would check electric outlets, we would check windows, we would check walls just to see that there are any cracks. We will frequently check ceilings to see if there's any staining up on the ceiling, and we'll just go through the rest of the room. And then a bathroom, we would just check to see if toilets are flushing, sinks are working, any of that kind of stuff. Again, electric outlets and windows are part of all of these different types of inspections, or the different parts of this. Okay, so here we're in the master bathroom of this house. Just a couple things we're going to point out. We would run all of these fixtures and check for leaks. I like to run a lot of water during inspections, so we would let the tub run for sometimes 30 minutes while we're doing the inspection. Super important thing on showers, these showers need to be tempered glass, and any of the glass within the bathroom is supposed to be tempered glass as well. So what we would look for is called the bug on the glass, and frequently there will be a little etching. I can see it on this one. So this is going to be tempered glass. We would also want to make sure that any of the windows in the bathroom would be tempered glass too. So they should be labeled. Yeah, I can see a label on the bottom corner of that one and then the bottom quarter of that one. So that is something that's super important so people don't get cut in case the glass breaks. We're in the master bedroom closet. This is the attic access. So for attics, I think it's really imperative that a home inspector at least look in the attic. Walking is a judgment call because there's a possibility of stepping through ceiling. So we're always a little careful about that. I like to set a drop cloth down because inevitably some amount of insulation will fall down when we go up a ladder. But this is typical attic inspection. Luckily, nothing falling out there. And then we'll go all the way up in. So here we are heading up into the attic. We'll just take a quick look around. I'm not going to get in this attic, but I do want you to see some of the things we will typically find. So we're going to look at the roof structure. We like to look at ventilation. In this case, there's a ridge vent. So we would be looking around at that. On a newer house like this, you'll often have an insulation gauge. That tells us how much insulation is in the attic. And then again, we can look at the remainder of the structure. Interestingly, this particular house has, we're back to the radon system. This is the radon fan for the mitigation system. So that's a typical attic. We're outside. It's a beautiful day here. So this is a roof I'm going to make an attempt at climbing on. Just a word about safety with things. Inspectors are not required to climb on roofs. With our company, our rule is we will do it when it's safe to do it. So a wet roof or a wood roof would be something when it's wet and slippery we probably wouldn't do. But the idea here is to get a close-up look at the shingles and the chimney and all of the other appurtenances up on the roof. A lot of photos we take when we're doing roof inspection. So I'll head up. So here we would be looking at shingles, siding, trim, gutters, downspouts, all the things that are here. And I'll head up here. It looks to me like somebody's done this before because I can see that the roof is pretty scuffed up. And you can see this doesn't come up too often, but this is a septic tank cover. And there are 3 of these for the different baffles on this system. So this would absolutely be something that a typical home inspection would not include. Because we're always interested in looking at is grading around the house. And we want to make sure this is a fairly hilly or rolling neighborhood, but you can see, I'm not sure if the photo or the video here will show this, but we've got an area here where the soil is sloping towards the house. So there would be the possibility of water entry coming in there. Just an aside, this is a little trap for rodents. So they probably have had a little bit of a rodent, maybe a squirrel problem, ground squirrel, something like that. We're in the back of this house under the deck, and decks are very important. I heard an inspector say one time, if he had 10 minutes to inspect the house, he would spend a full 2 minutes under the deck looking at the construction. High liability because of the potential for collapse and injuries. I want to say that they've had 2,000 or 3,000 injuries and deaths in the last 5 years from decks. But in any case, that's stuff we want to look at carefully. Connections, posts to make sure that they're attached and secured properly. Underneath here, this is called the ledger that the deck is supported on. The ledger is super important. These have to be bolted connections into the house. If they're nailed on, I've gone so far as to tell people this is not a safe deck to be walking on. So there's a lot of involvement going on underneath the deck. Here's what we're talking about is the connections where the deck, there's a bolt. You can see where the deck is bolted to the house. So this is the ledger, and that white piece up there is the ledger flashing. Important. Something like this is just some discoloration. There's some algae growth on the outside of this house. That's fairly typical, can be pretty easily cleaned off. Question people will often ask is, what's the silver thing sticking off the back of the house? You can see on it, it says hot. That is the vent for that fireplace we were looking at inside. This house does not have a chimney. You notice that there's no pipe sticking up here. So that is the vent for the fireplace. Frequently we get questions about downspouts. It's super important to keep water running away from the house. So I would recommend that splash block, that's the concrete part, be pushed a little closer to the house, but ideally you would maybe even have the downspout extended further away. I like to see these going about 4 feet away from the house. Air conditioners. Today, it is early October right now. We're coming to the very end of the air conditioning season, so it's highly likely that within the next week or two, we will not be running air conditioners, and it's perfectly acceptable for an inspector to disclaim running air conditioners when it's below 60 degrees, because there's actually damage that can occur on the unit. This is the sump discharge, this white pipe, and this, I don't know where the end of this goes. It goes underground. My guess is it probably runs somewhere to the back of this house. This is a big piece of property, pretty heavily developed. You can see how the developer sloped the property so that all the stormwater runs generally away from the house. Question on this is the wellhead. This is where the well water is drawn into this house. We on properties close to Lake Michigan where we have city water supply, we probably won't see these, but out in the rural areas, wells are pretty common. Okay, so one thing that comes up frequently, and I think most home inspectors carry a moisture meter. This will detect moisture in wood or concrete or building material. So in this case, I don't know that there's really a big concern, but the way we would use it is we would literally poke in there and it would tell us a moisture reading. So I'll show you how this works. With my finger and these two little probes, you can see the moisture runs up because it's wet and it's conducting electricity. Without my finger being wet, even the moisture on my hand, you can see what happens there. So these are pretty sensitive instruments.